What if the key to everything wasn't in the house where the murders happened, but in a dusty, forgotten storage unit just 20 minutes away? A unit no one talked about. A place none of the neighbors knew existed. A steel door. A rusted padlock. And behind it, lifeless bodies. Old tapes. Bloodstained clothes. And something far, far worse. Rob Reiner is a name etched into Hollywood history. He brought us Stand By Me, A Few Good Men, When Harry Met Sally. He was the man behind the camera and the voice of reason in interviews. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But 5 days ago, that legacy was shattered violently. At 78, Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle, 70, were found brutally stabbed in their $13.5 million Brentwood estate. Not poisoned, not shot, stabbed, up close, personal, repeatedly. They were found by their daughter Romy. She's only 27. An actress, yes, but also now a witness to something so gruesome. The coroner's office refused to comment on what she saw. Their son Nick? He lived in the guest house just meters away. He was arrested that night, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. So far, the public story has stayed focused on the house, the crime scene, the son. But that's only half the story, maybe even less. Because the real horror, the one the press is just catching up to, began hours later when LAPD officers followed a quiet tip from a neighbor. A man who said he'd seen Nick Reiner moving boxes into a storage unit. Not recently, the day before the murders. And that's where things start to fall apart. Or maybe, that's where they finally start to make sense. Let me ask you something. Why would someone move boxes into a storage unit the day before their parents are brutally murdered? What was in those boxes that couldn't stay at home? And why was that unit registered, not under Nick's name, but under his father's? This is a story about a crime that looks like a tragedy, but smells like a cover-up. It's about family secrets, generations deep. It's about fame, pressure, paranoia, and the things even Hollywood royalty will do to protect their own. But it's also a story about what gets buried, and what refuses to stay buried. Because when the police opened that storage unit in Van Nuys just 5 hours after the crime scene was processed in Brentwood, they didn't find old furniture or unused film equipment or tax boxes. They found something far worse. Lifeless bodies on the floor. Yes, bodies. Not just Rob and Michelle. Not mannequins. Not props. Bodies. And the minute investigators saw what was lying on that cold, oil-stained floor, they stopped everything. They called for backup. And then the FBI. Because whatever this was, it had just gone from a double homicide to something bigger. Much bigger. Let's rewind just a bit. You've heard of Nick Reiner, right? Maybe not the way you know Jake Gyllenhaal or Timothée Chalamet, but he's been around. He co-wrote Being Charlie, a semi-autobiographical film about addiction and rehab. He was once the poster child of second chances. A Hollywood kid who fell hard and came back with a script in hand. But what the public never knew, until now, is how dark things really got behind closed doors. Multiple rehabs, police incidents that disappeared, domestic complaints swept under the rug, and a growing rift between Nick and his parents. Romy once hinted at it in a podcast, cryptically saying, "There are things in our family that, if people knew, they wouldn't believe." Well, Romy, people are about to believe. According to initial police reports, and we've seen early leaks from 2 sources close to the investigation, Nick's fingerprints weren't just all over the Brentwood estate. They were all over the contents of that storage unit. A unit no one in the family had visited in over a year. At least, not officially. But security footage from the Van Nuys facility paints a different story. A white SUV. License plate partially obscured. A man in a hoodie. Same build as Nick. Midnight. The night before the murders. He unlocks the unit. Drags something inside. Leaves. And doesn't come back. The door stays shut. Until the LAPD cracks the padlock open. Inside, 3 things that immediately jump out. First, a trunk. One of those old, wooden ones with leather straps and tarnished brass locks. It smelled, according to the first responders' body cam audio, like death. Second, blood. Not just on the floor, but smeared against a mirror on the wall. And beneath that mirror, the word liar was scratched into the concrete. Third, a bundle, wrapped in black plastic, twine around the edges. When officers cut it open, they stepped back. Inside, a body. Not Rob. Not Michelle. Someone else. Unidentified. Unclothed. No ID. Teeth partially removed. Hair burned off. A Jane Doe. Or a very intentional message. And next to that bundle, something even stranger. A burned script. Pages charred, but partially legible. It wasn't a screenplay in circulation. It wasn't a draft of anything known. It was titled, Mother, Father, Him, written by N. Reiner. Let that sink in. This wasn't just murder. This wasn't just a disturbed son lashing out. This was a project, a script, a statement. Some believe Nick was documenting something. Others say he was reenacting it, or worse, directing it. And if that's true, then the storage unit wasn't just a hiding place. It was a set, a soundstage for something that was never meant to be found. But it was found. And now, we have to ask, was this a breakdown? A cry for help? Or was it a performance? One that no one paid to see. Until it was already too late. And where does Romy fit into all of this? The daughter who walked into the estate and saw her parents butchered in the hallway? According to leaked audio from her police interview, the first words out of her mouth were, "He did it. I know he did. And you'll find proof, not in the house, but somewhere he thought we forgot about." That somewhere was the storage unit. And the proof? That's what this entire story is about. Because the deeper investigators go into that storage facility, the more they find. It wasn't just one unit. It wasn't just one trunk. There were 3 units, all rented under variations of the name R. Reiner. One even paid in cash since 2019. And each of them held something chilling. We'll get to the other units later. But for now, let's go back to the trunk, the script, the body. Because what came next, what the coroner confirmed just hours later, would blow this case wide open. And no one was ready for what it meant. Not the police, not the press, not even Romy. What did the coroner find? The body in the storage unit wasn't just another nameless victim. It was someone investigators should have found years ago. The remains matched a long, cold missing persons case. A woman who vanished in 2014. A name you probably don't recognize at first glance, Karen Ellerby. But here's the thing. Karen wasn't just anyone. She was a live-in nanny at the Reiner home. Employed for less than 6 months. Gone without a trace. And here's the kicker. Her disappearance never made headlines. Not one. Not even a police report from the Reiners. And now, her body was lying at Nick's feet, covered in burns, stuffed into plastic. A decade later. Are you seeing the pattern yet? Let's pause here for a second. Why would a powerful Hollywood family never report a missing employee? Why would her name vanish from payroll records? And why? Was she in a storage unit under Rob Reiner's name? That's the kind of detail that doesn't slip through the cracks. It gets pushed through. By power. By influence. By people who know exactly how to keep a secret alive. By killing the story before it ever breathes. And now, years later, that story is clawing its way out of a metal box in the valley. The coroner's report was horrifying. Karen's jaw had been broken in 2 places. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Defensive wounds on her wrists. But the most disturbing detail? Multiple sharp force injuries to the abdomen and chest. The exact same manner of death listed on Rob and Michelle Reiner's autopsy reports. Almost ritualistic. Almost symbolic. Almost like someone was repeating something. So here's the uncomfortable question no one wants to ask. Was Karen Ellerby the first? And if she was Rob Reiner truly the first target? Or just the last one left alive? We reached out to former employees of the Reiner estate. 2 housekeepers, 1 driver, and a former intern who worked under Michelle on a documentary project. Each of them said the same thing. The house was calm, organized, elegant. But Nick? Nick was chaos. Explosive arguments. Paranoia. Disappearances. One housekeeper said, "There were nights we didn't know if he'd come home with a script or a weapon." Another whispered, "We were told never to go near the guest house, not even to knock." And when asked about Karen Ellerby, their faces went pale. One said she remembered the name. Another swore she never existed. Contradictions. Inconsistencies. And then silence. Now here's where things take a turn. Because up until this point, you might assume this is just about a son gone mad. A troubled heir. A family imploding under pressure. But that changes, completely, when you learn what detectives found in the second storage unit. Because yes, there was more than one. Unit #C14. Smaller. Less organized. And far more disturbing. The door was stiff. hadn't been opened in years. Inside, tapes, dozens of them. Mini DV, VHS, even old high-8 formats. Labeled only with names. Or numbers. Or dates. Some said things like 812 basement. Michelle/projector. SR confession. The tapes were stacked with surgical precision. No dust. No cobwebs. Just row after row of silent documentation. And the strangest part? A note taped to the wall. Written in black marker. This is the only real footage. If you lie, play this. What did that mean? Who is it for? Why hide tapes like this unless you're scared of someone rewriting the truth? One officer on the scene said it was like stepping into a hidden archive. An obsession, an insurance policy, or a confession. But here's what made them freeze. One tape, labeled Mom. Last meal. They played it. And what it showed was not a dinner. Not a celebration. But a woman, Michelle, sitting alone. Crying. Talking to the camera like she knew she was being recorded and knew no one would believe her. Her words? If you're watching this, it means he did it. And I wasn't strong enough to stop him. Forgive me, Romy. Let that sink in. This wasn't just a mother afraid. This was a woman issuing a final warning. Not to police. Not to the world. To her daughter, Romy. And now, that daughter is the last surviving member of a once pristine Hollywood family. Left to piece together a puzzle soaked in blood, grief, and decades of secrets. So what does Romy say? So far, very little. But sources close to her team say she's furious. Not just at her brother, but at what's been protected for years. Allegedly, Romy told a friend, "There's more. There's always been more. And now people will finally see what I lived with." Another quote, "They kept things hidden. But the storage unit was always the thing. I told them. I told them. If anything ever happened, start there." She said that a year ago. Let's talk timing. Rob and Michelle were killed on Sunday, December 14th. The body in the storage unit? Experts say it had been moved there within 48 hours of the crime. The tapes? The metadata says they were filmed over 10 years, from 2013 to 2023. That's a full decade of recordings. So now we have to ask, was someone building a case this whole time? Was Michelle compiling evidence? Or was Nick staging his own twisted production? Because here's a detail that keeps investigators awake at night. Every tape had editing marks, cuts, transitions, music, not raw footage, post-produced, which means whoever made them wanted them to be watched, but only in the right order, only with the right audience, and only when the time was right. And now, the time has come. Investigators are combing through everything. The tapes, the handwriting, the metadata, the will, the secret properties, the mystery names that keep popping up, SR, Janelle, Salinger, and somewhere in all of this, the motive, the truth, the moment it all snapped. But before we dive into that, I want you to remember something. This story started with a key, a rusted little key, and a son moving boxes in the middle of the night. Now, it's about so much more, because what they found in that storage unit, what they saw on those tapes, will shake every single thing you thought you knew about Rob Reiner. And what comes next will make everything up to this point feel like a warm-up. Because the next revelation doesn't just expose Nick. It turns the spotlight on Rob himself. And trust me, no one saw that coming. Not the police. Not Romy. And certainly not the people who thought they'd buried the past for good. But what came next would change everything. What does it sound like when someone finds their parents murdered? The 911 operator said she'll never forget the tone. Not screaming. Not sobbing. But something else entirely. Frozen. Hollow. Almost calculated. The voice on the other end said, "They're not breathing. There's blood everywhere. I think they're dead. Please send someone." The caller? Romy Reiner. And what she found that day inside the Brentwood mansion was something no one should ever have to see. But here's the thing that stuck with investigators. Romy never once said their names. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not even Rob or Michelle. Just they. Is that grief? Shock? Or something deeper? Let's unpack it. The date was Sunday, December 14th. Mid-morning. Neighbors said they heard nothing strange the night before. No screams. No glass breaking. No alarms. Just silence. And that silence stretched all the way into the next day, when Romy arrived at the house and noticed something was off. The front gate, wide open. The security panel, dead. The side entrance, ajar. She stepped inside. The air was thick, stale. She called out, no answer. And then, as she turned the corner into the formal living room, she saw it. Her mother, on the floor, face down, blood pooled beneath her like a halo turned inside out. Rob was just a few feet away, collapsed near the fireplace, eyes open, staring. The crime scene was pure chaos, but eerily organized. No sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no valuables missing, and strangest of all, no signs of struggle. It was as if both victims had let their killer walk right up to them. And that's exactly what detectives now believe happened. At 11:32 a.m., Romy called 911. By 11:42, two LAPD patrol cars arrived on scene. By 12:05, the entire Brentwood block was sealed off. The Reiner estate had become a crime scene. And Romy? She was whisked away for questioning. Now let's pause here. Because in most cases, especially in high-profile murders, the surviving family member is protected, shielded from the press, sometimes even removed from the case entirely. But Romy? She wasn't playing defense. She was ready. In fact, one detective recalled her saying something chilling just minutes into the interview. I think I know who did this. And if I'm right, you'll find what you need somewhere else. When asked where, she leaned forward and said, check the storage unit in Van Nuys. The one Dad rented under the alias. Unit C14. Wait, what? An alias? A daughter suggesting her father used a fake name to hide a storage unit? And that unit might contain clues to her parents' murder? Yeah, this was no ordinary call. No ordinary case. And definitely no ordinary family. Let's rewind to the night before. Saturday, December 13th. Security camera footage from neighboring homes paints a timeline. At 9:17 p.m., Nick Reiner's SUV is seen exiting the Reiner driveway. He doesn't return. By 10 p.m., all lights inside the main house go dark. By 10:22 p.m., the guest house, where Nick had been staying, goes dark too. That's the last movement on any camera until Romy arrives the next morning. So where did Nick go? And why does that matter? Because here's the detail that breaks the whole case wide open. At 10:44 p.m., just 20 minutes after the Brentwood mansion went dark, a surveillance camera from the Van Nuys storage complex captured Nick's SUV entering the lot. He punched in a code, drove straight to Unit C14, opened it, stayed for 19 minutes, then left, and never came back. Want to hear something even crazier? That storage unit had been dormant for years. Inactive, paid in cash, registered under the name Richard Salinger. Sound familiar? It should. Salinger was the last name of Rob Reiner's longtime therapist and business partner, a man who mysteriously vanished in 2016. His car was found at the edge of Mulholland Drive. Suicide, they said. No note. No body. And now? His name was being used to rent a storage unit holding, among other things, evidence of a murder, coincidence, or a very deliberate breadcrumb. Back to Romy. Detectives say she remained calm during her initial statement. Too calm, some said, but others disagreed. She wasn't emotionless, one investigator later told reporters. She was focused, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Waiting for what? Justice? Revenge? Release? Or maybe exposure? Because here's what's wild. Romy knew about the storage unit. She knew the fake name. She knew the location. She even told them which box to open first. Who tells police something like that? Unless they're certain of what's inside. And what was inside? We covered it in the intro. But there's more. So much more. Let's talk about the phone. When detectives opened the trunk in C14, beneath the charred script and the bundled body, they found a phone. Old. Cracked screen. No SIM card. But inside, dozens of videos. Home footage. Arguments. Phone calls. One video showed Rob pacing in the kitchen, yelling at someone off-screen. Another showed Nick slamming a door. But one stood out. Dated December 10th. For days before the murders. Michelle. Sitting alone. She speaks into the camera. He's back. And he's not the same. He said something about the project. Said it's time for the ending. Ending? What ending? What project? Who's he? That's when detectives started asking questions no one wanted to answer. Romy, when asked again later in a follow-up interview, clarified something that stunned the lead investigator. The project wasn't a movie. It was his story. The story he thought we ruined. She wouldn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Because it lined up with something else they found in Unit B23, Another storage unit Rob had secretly paid for. A journal. Nick's. Dozens of entries. One stood out. 12/9. They tried to erase my third act, but I wrote the ending years ago, and I kept the receipts. Chilling. A man framing his family's breakdown like a film, and himself as both writer and director. Back at the mansion, crime scene analysts uncovered more disturbing signs. The knife used to kill Rob and Michelle? Missing. The cameras inside the house? Wiped. But there was one backup, buried deep in the cloud system. An off-site server that Rob had set up years ago. And one file was recently uploaded. Timestamp just 1 hour before the murders. It showed Nick walking through the kitchen, muttering to himself. Something about the finale. And that same phrase was later found etched into the mirror in Unit C14. The finale. So now let me ask you something. Was this really just a sun snapping? Or was it a scripted act? A long-planned crescendo? And if so, where does Romy fit in? Why did she know about the unit? Why didn't she speak up sooner? Or, had she tried? Was this her final move? Her way of saying, I told you. I warned you. Now believe me. Because one thing's for sure. That phone call she made on December 14th? That calm, flat voice? It wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the middle, and the worst was still to come. Because that night, while detectives processed the storage unit and reviewed the tapes, Romy received a message. An anonymous text. No sender. No contact ID. It said, there's one more unit. And it's not his. It's yours. How do you inherit a legacy you never asked for? More importantly, how do you survive one? Because Romy Reiner wasn't just the daughter of Rob and Michelle. She was born into a dynasty. The name, Reiner, carried weight in every Hollywood room. Doors opened. Projects greenlit. Award shows applauded before she even arrived. But behind the lights, behind the perfectly poised family photos, something had been unraveling for years. And by the time the police received that anonymous text about a third storage unit, Romy wasn't shocked. She was already bracing for impact. Because deep down, she knew. This wasn't just about Nick. This wasn't even just about the murders. This was about the entire Reiner legacy, and how it had been cracking beneath the surface for decades. Let's rewind the tape. Rob Reiner wasn't just an actor, or a director, or a political voice. He was Hollywood royalty. Son of Carl Reiner, comedy legend and creator of The Dick Van Dyke Show. Rob had grown up with Mel Brooks in the living room, Steve Martin at the dinner table, and scripts on his pillow instead of bedtime stories. By the time he turned 30, he was already a household name thanks to All in the Family. By 40, he directed some of the most iconic films of the 20th century. And by the time he married Michelle Singer in 1989, he'd cemented himself as not just an artist, but a brand. The Reiner name meant something. To audiences, to studios, to voters. But what did it mean to his own children? Nick Reiner was the first to crack under that weight. Born in 1992, he was always the troubled one. Bright but angry, gifted but volatile. He bounced from school to school, rehab by 15, arrests by 18, and behind every headline was a quietly issued press statement, reminding the world that Nick is receiving support from his loving family. But that wasn't the full story, because while Rob was championing political causes on CNN and shaking hands at the Emmys, his own son was spiraling. And the silence from the family? Deafening. Romy, meanwhile, was kept far from the chaos. The golden child. The quiet one. She enrolled in film school, did voice work for animated shows, posted selfies with friends and behind-the-scenes snapshots with her father on set. But every so often, something would slip through. A cryptic tweet. A deleted Instagram story. Quotes like, blood doesn't always mean loyalty. You can love someone and fear them at the same time. Looking back now, those posts feel less like angsty Gen Z musings, and more like coded warnings. Warnings no one read. Inside the industry, whispers followed the Reiners. People spoke of screaming matches on set, of Rob refusing to speak to Nick during the filming of Being Charlie, a semi-autobiographical film Nick co-wrote about addiction. The tension was so bad, one producer reportedly left the project mid-shoot, saying, I signed up for a movie, not a therapy session. Still, they pressed forward. The film was released. Interviews were given. Rob called it one of the most important things I've ever done with my son. But privately, he and Nick hadn't spoken for 6 months. Michelle, by all accounts, was the glue. Friends described her as warm, quiet, protective, but also exhausted. One close friend said she once caught Michelle crying outside a charity gala. When asked what was wrong, Michelle simply said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a movie where I didn't write the ending." That line would echo later, after the tapes were discovered in the storage unit. Because on one of those tapes, Michelle says the exact same thing, verbatim, into the camera, her voice trembling, like a woman rehearsing her goodbye. But back to the legacy. The Reiner brand wasn't just built on movies, it was built on control. Control of image, control of narrative, control of what the public saw and what it never would. For decades, they succeeded. Every red carpet appearance was polished, every scandal managed. Every whisper about Nick silenced by a new deal, a photo op, a heartfelt interview. But that control came at a cost. And when it cracked, it shattered. Investigators, digging deeper into the family's private life, uncovered sealed court documents from 2015. Documents revealing a restraining order filed against Nick by a former family assistant. The details were grim. Accusations of threats, late-night screaming, violent episodes. The case never went to trial. Settled privately. And guess who paid for the settlement? Not Nick. Not even Rob. It was Michelle. From a private account. One Rob didn't have access to. The same account later linked to payments made to the storage facility where Karen Ellerby's body was found. Let that sink in. But here's the twist. Rob Reiner was never publicly linked to that assistance case. He never commented. Never acknowledged it. And when asked years later about turbulence at home, he laughed it off. What family doesn't have a little drama? That quote didn't age well. As for Romy, her silence began to shift in 2021. She started writing a script. A passion project, she said. Never shared the plot. Never attached a studio. But the working title? The Third Child. People assumed it was metaphorical. Until now. Because recent forensic data pulled from Rob's home server suggests that The Third Child was based on entries found in one of Rob's journals. Entries referencing someone named E. A child. Possibly a secret one. Possibly Nick's half-sibling. Or worse, someone else entirely. A person the family never acknowledged. A person who may have once lived on the estate. All of this leads to a chilling question. Was the Reiner family hiding more than just dysfunction? Were they hiding people? Secrets? Pasts? Multiple sources close to the investigation believe Romy may have uncovered something years ago. Something she wasn't supposed to find. Something Rob and Michelle tried to bury. And Nick? Maybe he was the result. Or the consequence. Or the one who decided he wouldn't be ignored anymore. Here's what we know for sure. The Brentwood estate wasn't just a home. It was a fortress. For security layers. Panic room. Motion sensors on every floor. Yet somehow, on the night of December 13th, none of it stopped what happened. Because the threat? It wasn't outside. It was already inside. Living in the guest house. Or maybe inside the bloodline itself. Now let's go back to that text Romy received. There's one more unit. And it's not his. It's yours. Unit E17. Registered under R. Reiner. But not Rob. Romy. And guess when the lease began? 3 weeks before the murders. Paid in cash. No contact number. Just an email. silent3rd@protonmail.com. When investigators opened that unit, they found a diary, a camera, and a whiteboard. The first sentence scrawled across it. This is where the lies end. And that, dear viewer, is exactly where Chapter 3 begins. Because what Romy recorded in that unit was never meant for public eyes. But what she said would turn the entire case upside down. Have you ever seen a detective cry? Not from sadness, not from grief, but from overwhelm. The kind of emotional collapse that happens when everything you've ever been taught about motive, logic, and evidence shatters in one moment. That's what happened when the LAPD opened storage unit E17. The one tied to Romy Reiner. Because what they found inside didn't just confirm their worst fears. It redefined them. And it started with a camera. Still recording. Battery long dead. Memory card full. A Canon XF605. Studio quality. Clean lens. Tripod mounted. Facing a single, white chair. And on that chair, a note. Written in Romy's handwriting. This is where I tell the truth, before someone else writes it for me. Let's backtrack. How did Romy end up renting a storage unit in the first place? The lease was signed on November 22nd, just 3 weeks before the murders. No ID presented. Paid in full for 6 months. A young woman, hoodie up, glasses on. The clerk remembers her because she asked a strange question. If someone finds something in here after I die, what happens to it? The clerk laughed, thought she was joking. She wasn't. Because in Romy's world, everything was a setup. Every smile, every family photo, every interview, all curated, all controlled. Until now, the unit was stark, cold, no furniture, no clutter, just a single shelf, a camera, a chair, and a box labeled Dad. Inside the box, scripts, journals, contracts. One labeled, Emergency NDA, Michelle R. Another, Custody Proposal, RS versus CR. The initials don't lie. RS, Richard Salinger. CR, Carl Reiner, Rob's father. Wait, Carl? That's the moment investigators stopped breathing. Because Carl Reiner passed away in 2020. And now his name was popping up in a custody proposal from decades ago? What was happening? Romy's video logs start with a date. November 23rd, day 1. She sits in the chair, eyes red, not crying, but done crying. And she speaks calmly. I'm recording this because I think my family might kill each other. And if they don't, someone else might. She doesn't blink, doesn't laugh. They're lying about everything. About Nick. About Salinger. About the real reason I was sent away for 3 years. Wait, sent away? To where? They told the press I went to college. But I was in recovery. Not for addiction. For memory suppression. And that's when things spiral. Let's pause. Because this moment in the investigation changes everything. Not because Romy is accusing anyone outright, but because she's introducing an entirely new layer to the case. Suppressed memories. The kind of phrase that makes defense attorneys salivate and prosecutors tremble. Romy claimed on video that between the ages of 13 and 16, she underwent experimental memory therapy under the guidance of a man named Dr. Lennox. That name didn't appear on any licensed psychology boards, but it did appear on a payment transfer from Rob Reiner's production company to a clinic in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Purpose of payment? Creative psychological consulting. What does that even mean? And why was Romy the subject? According to her logs, she had breakthroughs in late 2020. Memories that had been previously locked. She described a locked basement room in the Brentwood estate. Play sessions with strangers whose faces she wasn't allowed to see. Scripts. Always scripts. Read aloud. Memorized. Rehearsed. Being told, none of this is real. It's rehearsal. You're safe. Are you feeling sick yet? Because investigators were. Day 2 of Romy's video logs digs even deeper. She pulls out a script. It's titled The Silent Child. Written in 1998. Before Romy was even born. The protagonist? A little girl named Eliza, who discovers that her parents aren't really her parents, but actors hired to raise her for a secret psychological study. Sound familiar? Romy flips through the script. Laughs bitterly. Funny thing is, I found this in our attic. With notes in Dad's handwriting. And a date next to it. Begin filming. Fall 2003. She was born in 1996. And filming began in 2003. 7 years old. Exactly when she said the memory started. You still think this is just a murder case? Because by now, the LAPD didn't. The FBI had been looped in. Psychological profilers. Even a former CIA consultant who specialized in black site memory control. Because what Romy was describing wasn't therapy. It was conditioning, behavioral scripting, loop training, the same techniques used in cults and covert military interrogations. But for what? That's what Romy asked herself, over and over, until she found something in Rob's office. A file marked SCP-06-21, subject Romy. Photos, brain scans, transcripts of interviews she didn't remember giving, and one phrase repeated throughout, unaware of camera. That line appears 18 times, which meant she'd been filmed, watched, tested, her whole life. Here's the most disturbing part. She believed her parents were part of it, but not entirely in control. In one video log, she says, Mom always cried after. She said she was sorry, said she didn't know it would go this far. And later, Dad said it was art, said it was for a purpose, said I'd understand someday. That day never came, but the camera kept rolling. Back in the storage unit, investigators found a small metal box hidden in the wall. Inside, 2 old USB drives. Labeled, Nick, breakdown. Romy, scripted. The first one showed footage of Nick in what looked like a padded room, screaming, fighting invisible figures. A woman's voice off camera keeps repeating, "This isn't real. You're performing." The second drive? Clips of Romy, age 9, reciting lines, over and over. Each time she gets them wrong, the screen cuts to black. Then starts again, and again. A loop. A perfect loop. Like someone was programming her. When they showed the footage to Romy, now under protective custody, she broke, collapsed, whispered, I told you it was real." And that was the moment the FBI pivoted. From murder to conspiracy, from family breakdown to long-term psychological manipulation. And the killer might not be who we think. Because here's the new theory. What if Nick didn't snap? What if he was triggered, conditioned, just like Romy? What if the entire Reiner family was part of an experiment they never consented to? And the final scene was always going to end in blood. But we're not done yet. Because Unit E17 held one more surprise. A journal, handwritten, Michelle's, dated 1997 to 2001. And one entry, dated July 4th, 1998, stands out. He brought the doctor today. Said it's time to start. I said she's too young. He said genius starts early. Then, if anything happens to me, check the garden. That's where I buried the first one. The first one? What does that mean? Another child? Another experiment? The garden at Brentwood was searched 2 days later. And what they found? We'll open chapter 4. Because buried in that soil wasn't just bones. It was the final key to a legacy no one saw coming. Let me ask you something. When you look at an old photo, what's the first thing you notice? The smiles? The clothes? The eyes? Or is it the things that don't belong? Because in this case, it wasn't what was in the picture that caught the FBI's attention. It was what had been done to it. A family portrait. Framed. Weathered. Faded from sunlight. Found sealed in plastic. Buried beneath the Brentwood garden. Right alongside a rusted baby rattle and a silk baby bonnet embroidered with the initials ER. But the photo? It told a story far louder than any journal ever could. Rob, Michelle, Nick, Romy, and a fifth figure. A young child. Face turned toward the camera, eyes blank, smile wide. Except, their face had been scratched out. Not once. Not with age or accident. But deliberately. Multiple times. Pen. Knife. Fire damage along the edges. The rest of the photo was untouched. Only that child's face had been mutilated. Which raises the question, who was in that picture? And why had they been erased? The FBI immediately sent the image to their digital forensics team. It was fragile, nearly torn in half. But they scanned, enhanced, and reconstructed what they could. And what they found, it wasn't just any child. It was someone completely unknown to public records. A face that didn't match Romy, Nick, or any known relative. Approximate age, 5 years old. Male. Mixed race features. Wearing a shirt that said Star Academy Preschool. And guess what? That preschool shut down in 2002 due to a missing child case. A child named Elliot Rivera. A boy who vanished during recess. A boy who was never found. Until now, the FBI cross-referenced DNA from the garden remains with the National Missing Persons Database. And in 72 hours, it was confirmed. The bones belonged to Elliot Rivera, the missing boy from the preschool. Last seen in a white van with tinted windows. No suspect ever charged. Case went cold. But now, he'd been found in Rob Reiner's backyard. Buried, hidden, forgotten. Until Romy's mother, Michelle, left behind that chilling clue in her journal. Check the garden. That's where I buried the first one. She buried him. Not the killer. Her. Why? Was it guilt? Protection? Or was she ordered to? Let's back up. In 1999, Rob Reiner began quietly funding a controversial early childhood development center. It wasn't public. It wasn't commercial. And it certainly wasn't legal. The center was nicknamed Project Seed. Hidden beneath a shell corporation called Sunnyside Educational Ventures, it was pitched as a place for gifted, unsocialized children to be molded into future thought leaders. According to leaked emails, the goal was to nurture isolated genius through immersive, controlled narrative exposure. Translation? They were conditioning children, using scripts, environments, role play, gaslighting. They treated life like a film set. And Rob? He wasn't just a donor. He was on the board. And one of the children in the program, Elliot Rivera, documents pulled from a hidden safe in the Brentwood estate showed that Michelle had lobbied against the project as early as 2001. A letter she wrote, never sent, reads, "They're not actors, Rob. They're kids. You don't get to write their trauma and call it art." But he kept going. The project continued until 2002, when Elliot disappeared. After that, all funding stopped. All traces wiped. Or so they thought. Because now we had a body. We had a photo. We had a journal entry. And we had motive. The FBI interrogated Romy under protective custody. She confirmed she'd never seen Elliot, but admitted she had dreams of a boy who used to sing in the attic. Dreams? Or memories? She said she was punished for talking about him, told he was imaginary. But when she saw the photo recovered from the garden, she collapsed. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the one they said never existed. The one they said never existed." That line echoed like thunder. Because what if everything Romy remembered, every buried trauma, was real? What if Elliot wasn't just collateral damage in a secret experiment? What if he was the first cover-up? And then came the most disturbing twist of all. Because while analyzing the metadata on the digital reconstruction of the photo, investigators found a number scribbled on the back. A series of digits that at first looked random, until they ran it through facial indexing software. It was a file number from an internal system, one belonging to a now-defunct Hollywood casting agency. They reached out to the last remaining employee still alive. She asked for immunity, then dropped a bombshell. Back then, kids didn't need to audition. Not if you knew the right people. They came from school programs. Connected programs. Some of them were brilliant. But some were broken. She recognized Elliot's face. Said he was brought in for a test shoot on a project called The Mirror Script. Shot in 2001. Directed by Rob Reiner. Never released. No records. No footage. Until now. Because back in storage unit C14, the one tied to Nick, investigators found a tape labeled MS-02. Inside, grainy footage. Children playing. A girl, Romy, running in circles. A boy, Elliot, watching from the stairs. They look confused. There's no crew. No boom mics. Just hidden cameras. And a voice off screen. "Keep going, Elle, don't break character." Elliot stares, nods, then begins crying. The screen cuts to black. What kind of parent does this? What kind of family builds a legacy on the manipulation of children? We don't have full answers yet, but we have a theory. One the FBI won't confirm publicly, but insiders have leaked. And it goes like this. Rob Reiner ran an off-the-books behavioral study under the guise of early childhood education. The study focused on emotional scripting, teaching children to perform their feelings in exchange for safety, reward, or affection. The children were monitored, recorded, and corrected until real emotion became indistinguishable from performance. Elliot was part of this. So was Romy. So, perhaps, was Nick. But Elliot couldn't take it. And when he tried to leave, he vanished. And the only person who tried to bury the truth, literally, was Michelle. She buried him in the garden. Buried the photo. Buried her guilt. Until it all came back to life. So who was in that picture? He was a victim. A missing boy. A pawn in someone's twisted masterpiece. But now, he's something more. He's the crack in the Reiner dynasty's armor. The buried secret that refused to stay hidden. And the moment the FBI made that connection between Elliot, the casting agency, the script, the tapes, they realized something terrifying. This might not be the only case. Because Rob Reiner wasn't the only Hollywood figure tied to Project Seed. There were other names, other board members, other children. But those files were locked until a single piece of mail arrived at FBI headquarters. An anonymous envelope. Inside, a flash drive. One folder, titled Seed_Children_confirmed. And the first name on the list? Rivera, Elliot. But the second? Reiner, Nicholas. She wasn't just a Hollywood wife. Michelle Singer Reiner was a producer, a screenwriter, a quiet force behind some of Rob Reiner's most enduring projects. But she was also something else. A mother trying to survive a house full of shadows. And what she left behind in her final days wasn't a will. Wasn't a goodbye letter. It was a diary. A leather-bound, wine-colored book with worn edges and delicate handwriting, hidden inside the lining of her vanity drawer. Undated entries, scribbled margins, pressed flowers between the pages. But every word, a roadmap to the unraveling of a family once seen as untouchable. Because Michelle didn't write to remember. She wrote to confess. And her confessions would shake the investigation harder than any piece of physical evidence so far. The diary was discovered by FBI agents during their second sweep of the Brentwood estate. It wasn't cataloged, wasn't hidden behind a safe or in some sealed box. It was right there, tucked into a silk bag beneath her favorite lipstick and a broken comb. Almost like she wanted it to be found. And once opened, the pages poured out a storm of pain, fear, and revelation. Let's start with one of the earliest entries, written, based on surrounding clues, sometime in late 1996. Nick hasn't stopped crying. I try to hold him, but he pulls away. Rob says it's normal, that all great minds have darkness in them. But I don't want to raise another project. I want a child. Wait, another project? That line alone sent shockwaves through the task force. Because it implied there was a precedent. That Nick wasn't the beginning. That Project Seed, or whatever it was, didn't start with Nick. It was already in motion. And Rob? He wasn't hesitating. He was continuing. Another entry, 2 years later. He wants to film Romy now. Says it's time. That she has the right look and a calm mind. I told him no. Screamed it. But he smiled. Said it's just documentation. For safety. For her future. Then this. They made her read lines from the mirror script. She couldn't pronounce half the words. She's 3. And suddenly, the picture gets clearer. These weren't random moments of overparenting. They were deliberate conditioning exercises. And Michelle knew. She wasn't blind. She was trapped. But why didn't she leave? Why didn't she run? Her words answer that, too. I tried to leave in 97. Packed a bag. Took Romy in the middle of the night. But by the time I reached LAX, 2 men were already waiting. Said I couldn't take her. Said she was part of a government-endorsed project. Said if I ran again, they'd charge me with treason. Treason? That's not a word you throw around lightly. And if true, it meant Project Seed wasn't just a private experiment. It had federal protection, government teeth. Now do you see why she stayed? Not because she was weak, but because she had no way out. The entries only grew darker. Here's one from around 2003. Nick disappeared for 2 days. Came back with a stitched eyebrow and no memory of where he'd been. Rob said it was field work. Part of his identity shaping. What are we doing to him? I'm scared of my son now. And I hate that I am. But there's something behind his eyes I can't recognize anymore. Like he's performing me. Like he's wearing my love like a costume. Pause on that last line. Wearing my love like a costume. That's not a metaphor. That's a woman describing someone whose emotions were rehearsed, scripted, installed. And it wasn't just Nick. Because by 2007, Romy started displaying memory gaps. In one entry, Michelle writes, she keeps asking who Elliot is. But we never told her that name. Not once. She says she sees him in dreams. That he talks to her from the blue room. The blue room. Investigators would later confirm that the upstairs guest bedroom, painted blue, was where Elliot Rivera had stayed briefly in 2001 during his transition period. A room that was later sealed, painted over, redecorated, but still remembered, by a child they tried to erase. Then came the most damning entry of all, dated only 2 nights before, just before the murders. Nick came to the door tonight, said he forgave me, said he understood why we had to do what we did, but there was something hollow about it, like he was reading a line, like he was wrapping up a scene. He said, the 3rd act is coming, Mom. You're going to love it. And then he smiled, not like my son, like a stranger. And finally, I think we're not going to make it out. I think this story ends here. She knew. She saw it coming. And she wrote it down, so no one could twist it later. So history couldn't be rewritten again. But the diary didn't just expose Rob and Nick. It named others, producers, psychologists, studio executives, all of whom were part of what Michelle called the quiet script, a system of grooming, shaping, and controlling child behavior for the purpose of developing the perfect on-screen persona, starting from toddlerhood. Kids who weren't just actors. They were characters, programmed, trained, and if they cracked, recast, just like Elliot. Just like Romy almost was. Just like Nick. There's one more entry worth noting. It reads, if anyone ever finds this, I beg you, don't see Rob as a monster. He believed in the story more than the people in it. He was consumed by the idea that pain could be curated into perfection, that trauma could be harvested like crops and turned into genius. But he lost himself, and now we'll all pay the price. Haunting, because in a twisted way, Michelle was trying to forgive him, even as she anticipated her own murder. Even as her world collapsed, the diary was turned over to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. They called it the most psychologically disturbing primary source they'd ever seen. Not because it was violent, but because it was structured. Rob kept schedules for his children's emotions. Nick had meltdown windows penciled into his day. Romy had crying rehearsals after breakfast. And Michelle? She had silence. She was the observer, the reluctant accomplice, and eventually, the whistleblower. But she whispered her whistleblowing into pages, instead of microphones. And now, her words were the only map left. So what does this mean for the case? For Romy? For Nick? For Rob's legacy? Well, one thing is clear. The story being told in courtrooms and headlines isn't the real one. The real story is buried in basements, burned scripts, and broken children who were told their pain was art. And as the truth peels back, one layer at a time, we're beginning to see what Michelle saw all along. That sometimes the scariest monsters don't hide in the dark. They perform in the light. And the next chapter takes us into those tapes, the ones labeled Room C and Mother. Because if you thought the diary was disturbing, what's on camera is much, much worse. What's more terrifying than a hidden secret? One that stares directly back at you through a screen. Not metaphor, not exaggeration. Actual footage of children, of training, of conditioning. And what made the FBI freeze mid-breath wasn't just what they saw. It was how well it was filmed. Because these weren't surveillance videos. They were productions. Directed, framed, edited, color-graded, and in some cases, scored with music. But they were never meant for an audience. Until now. Let's rewind to the moment they opened the box. It was found inside storage unit C14, the one Nick accessed the night of the murders. It was matte black, unlabeled, locked with a combination Michelle's diary hinted at, Romy's birthday, backwards. Inside, 36 tapes, mini DV VHS, digital cassettes, even some high-quality SD cards, each marked with cryptic labels. C01 mirror, M07, sequence 3, NR breakdown, take 2, RR interview, non-compliant version, and one simply titled, The Ending. Investigators didn't know where to start, so they began with the tape labeled Room C. It opens in silence. A gray room, 4 white walls, 1 mirror, a child sitting in a chair. It's Romy, 7 years old, wearing a plain dress, barefoot. She's staring at herself in the mirror. A voice, calm, male, speaks off camera. What do you see, Romy? She doesn't respond. Remember, your feelings are pretend unless we say they're real. Do you understand? Still no answer. Then a click. Suddenly, the mirror flashes with her image distorted, like a funhouse reflection. Romy gasps. She starts to cry. Stop crying. That's not your line. The camera zooms in slowly. The voice continues. Let's try again. Pretend it hurts, but you like it. Say, I'm safe when I'm watched. And Romy says it. Shakily. Quietly. But she says it. I'm safe when I'm watched. The room behind the mirror was later found in the Reiner's Brentwood basement. It had been covered up with drywall during a renovation, but traces of old screw holes and camera brackets still lined the hidden studs. So it was real. Room C wasn't a soundstage. It was home. The tapes got worse. Another showed Nick, aged 10. He's sitting on the floor of what looks like a makeshift classroom. Flashcards are shown. Sad, anger, hunger, jealousy. Each time he picks one, he has to perform the emotion. Not feel it. Perform it. And if he doesn't do it convincingly? There's a jarring buzzer. Lights flash red. A stern voice says, again, 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 over and over, until tears start forming, until his breathing shifts, until he breaks. That clip is labeled NR Conditioning, Phase 2. Here's where it turns. Because one of the tapes, M07, Sequence 3, is a private session between Michelle and Romy. Except Romy doesn't know she's being filmed. She's in bed, half asleep. Michelle sits beside her, brushing her hair. She whispers, one day, baby, you'll understand why we had to let them do this. They said it would keep you brilliant. They said it would protect you. But it's not art. It's not control. It's a cage. And I'm so sorry I didn't stop it sooner. Then, softly, they're watching even now. And she looks directly into the hidden camera. It's the only tape where someone breaks the fourth wall. The only one where someone seems to say, I know you're there. That moment became the emotional center of the entire investigation. Because it proved something horrifying. They weren't just participants. They were prisoners. Another clip, labeled, Reiner, Rob, interview, non-compliant version. This one stunned everyone. It wasn't a public interview. It wasn't for media. It was a private camera confession. Rob, sitting in his office, disheveled, agitated, talking to someone off-screen. I told them this wouldn't end clean, that you can't undo trauma just because you filmed it. But they said the footage would be insurance, that if we ever got exposed, the tapes would show it was therapeutic, not criminal. He pours whiskey, laughs bitterly. They're kids. Of course they believe what we tell them. But the performances? They were flawless. Nick's rage? Romy's breakdowns? We could have sold them to studios, and no one would have known. Then his face changes. He leans closer. But I knew. And I started to forget who was performing, and who was just living in the script. He cuts the tape. That was the last known footage of Rob before the murders. But the most chilling tape was the final one they played. The ending. It starts with static, then a slow fade into Romy. Present day. Same chair. Same angle. Same dead stare. She's holding a letter. Her voice is calm. I found this in Mom's room. It's from Dad, dated 3 days before she died. She opens it, reads aloud. Michelle, they're coming for us. You were right. We crossed the line. But it's too late to stop now. If this plays, it means I'm dead. And if I'm dead, I need you to know, none of this was supposed to end in blood. It was supposed to end in brilliance. Then Romy adds, this is me ending it. She lights the letter on fire, watches it burn, then looks into the camera and says, the script is over. Cut to black. End of tape. So what do we do with all this? We can't unsee the footage. We can't unhear the cries. We can't unfeel the chill of children begging for silence. And yet it happened, right under Hollywood's nose. And no one asked questions, because the Reiners were respected, celebrated, untouchable. But the tapes told the truth. And the truth? It doesn't lie. Now the DOJ is preparing formal charges. Not just against Nick. Not just posthumously against Rob. But against surviving members of Project Seed. Producers, therapists, lawyers, people who knew, people who helped, people who cashed in on the performance of pain. And the world is watching, not through a scripted lens, not through a press release, but through raw, horrific, unedited truth. The kind you can't look away from, the kind that lingers. And the next step takes us even deeper, because there's still one person missing. Someone who appears on a few of the tapes. A young woman, late 20s, wearing sunglasses, blonde, always behind the camera, always giving instructions, unidentified. Until Romy said one name the FBI never expected, a name that connected all of this back to the beginning. Janelle. And that name will change the case again, because the woman behind the camera wasn't a stranger. She was family. Sometimes the deepest scars don't scream. They whisper. And when Romy Reiner finally broke her silence, for real, she didn't do it through the press. Not in court. Not in front of flashing cameras or clickbait headlines. She did it in a room with no windows. Surrounded by 2 agents, 1 recorder, and a single photograph placed face down on the table. And when she flipped that photo over, she didn't gasp, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She just stared, then said one word, Janelle. And with that, everything changed. Let's rewind. The footage uncovered in the tapes from the storage unit had already given investigators their most valuable leads. But the identity of the mysterious blonde woman, appearing in 3 separate clips, remained unsolved. She was the one giving commands, directing the children, correcting their emotions like a conductor orchestrating trauma. The FBI ran facial recognition. No match. No public records. No known employment under Rob's companies. But when they showed Romy a still image from the video, her entire demeanor shifted. No panic. No fear. But recognition. Like seeing a ghost from a dream you were told never existed. And what she said next blew the entire case wide open. Her name is Janelle, Romy began. She was my cousin. At least, that's what I was told. But I think she was more than that. I think she was part of the original group. Original group? FBI agents pressed her for clarity, and Romy hesitated. But then, in her soft, flat voice, she explained. There were always whispers. People around the house. Guests who weren't really guests. They didn't talk much, but they watched, took notes, sometimes filmed me while I played. I thought they were friends of my dad, but Janelle was always different. She trained me. Trained? She told me when to smile, when to cry, how to make it real. She said real emotion was sloppy, and art didn't need to be real. It just needed to look like it was. That quote sent shivers down every spine in the room, because one of the tapes, labeled Mirror Exercise, RR, featured that exact phrase, word for word. And Janelle? She was the one who said it. But who was she? And how was she connected to the Reiners? That's when Romy dropped the first bombshell. She wasn't my cousin. I found her birth certificate one day, hidden in a box with old scripts. Her last name wasn't Reiner. It was Salinger, as in Richard Salinger, Rob Reiner's alleged longtime therapist. The same man who vanished in 2016. The same name used to rent the storage unit. That made Janelle his daughter. And if that's true, she wasn't just a director behind the scenes. She was a second-generation handler, raised inside the system, groomed by her father, then embedded into the Reiner household. As what? A cousin, a caretaker, a teacher, a plant. Romy's confession didn't stop there. She went on to describe events that, at first, investigators struggled to believe. Janelle used to tell me stories about a place called the White House. Not the real one, a fake one, where kids like me went when they forgot how to feel. She said it was safe, quiet. But when I asked to go, she got angry, said it was only for failures, for broken scripts. Broken scripts. That line again. This wasn't parenting. It wasn't mentorship. It was programming. And Janelle? She wasn't just managing it. She was designing it. Romy continued. She had a clipboard. Always. She made me write my dreams every morning. Told me it was for continuity. I didn't know what that meant. She said real children didn't have good arcs unless someone shaped them. And perhaps the most chilling quote of all. She said I was her masterpiece. That one day, I'd thank her. The agents asked why she never told anyone before. Romy just shrugged. I did. No one believed me. Not even